start a little, I'll give a little bit of orientation about me and my background and how I came to this work. I was an immigration attorney. After I graduated from law school in Chicago, I moved to Minnesota and started working for an immigration law firm that specialized in physician immigration. And my father was a foreign medical graduate who came to the United States, so I had a really personal connection to the work that I was doing. After a couple of years, my work expanded into representing asylum seekers, representing individuals who were in immigration court removal proceedings. And after 18 years of practicing as a private immigration attorney, this position opened up with the city of Minneapolis and was a very unique opportunity. So I was thrilled when I was selected for this position. This office has been in existence for a couple of years. I'll give just a little bit of orientation about the work of the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. Becky provided some context, but really some of the main responsibilities include to ensure that elected officials are aware of immigration changes and understand how those changes impact our immigrant and refugee residents. I also help to identify solutions, whether it is communicating information, connecting people to legal service providers, or highlighting important information that people need to know to defend themselves. The city of Minneapolis has relationships with 3 legal service organizations. I will talk a little bit more about them later. They are the Advocates for Human Rights, Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota, and Volunteer Lawyers Network. I'm seeing some nodding, so like these are familiar organizations maybe to some of you, with the goal of ensuring that people are not prevented from accessing competent legal services based upon an inability to pay. Immigration law is a complicated area of law. As Heidi, you probably know, having worked in that field and others as well. It is expensive to hire a private attorney to assist you with your immigration case, particularly since the beginning of the Trump administration. There are more avenues for error, and so it's even more important for people to be able to communicate with someone who knows what they're doing. So we're very fortunate that the City Council has established this funding so that we have these relationships with our legal service partners. And so one of the things that I do is I work together with these nonprofit organizations to communicate information to our immigrant and refugee residents. That can be through in-person information sessions, on the radio, since the advent of COVID-19, through Zoom and other virtual events, so that people have the information they need to make informed decisions for themselves and for their families. Yes, so I see the 3 legal service partner organizations, and I can put them into the chat. And I know Becky has a 1-pager that has these organizations listed and their websites. So I'll put that up afterwards. I also want to say, please feel free to ask your questions throughout in the chat. I really would love for this to be a dialogue. You know, when I speak to people, I end up learning as much from them as I impart. And so would love to hear your questions and comments as I'm going through things. So that's a quickie overview. And I'd like to give a little bit of population information for the city. I'm not going to overwhelm you with stats. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a snapshot, and I'd like to help facilitate an understanding of the interplay between immigrant and refugee communities and the challenges of COVID-19. So just generally speaking, in terms of our immigrant population in the city of Minneapolis, we are estimated to have approximately 65,000 immigrant residents. That is composing 15.4% of our population. Of that number, an estimated a little over 21,000 are refugees, approximately 1,400 are Daca eligible, deferred action for childhood arrivals. So people who came to the United States as children and under the Obama era Daca program are able to apply for a short-term authorization, 2-year authorization renewable to be in the United States and also obtain work authorization. And then we've got an estimated 14,700 undocumented individuals. Of the immigrant and refugee residents in Minneapolis, people come from all over the world. Some of the largest populations of residents here in the city are, as many of you probably could guess, Mexico, Somalia, people who are Hmong, India, Ethiopia, Vietnam, China, Burma, Liberia, and Korea. Those are some of the top countries and ethnicities of immigrants who live in the city of Minneapolis. I want to briefly touch on some demographics as they relate to employment, housing, health insurance, and mixed status households. And I'll talk about why that's important afterwards. But from the standpoint of employment, to a little over 20% of the immigrant workforce works in the food sector, in the food industry. So that's about about 5,600 people. 16.5% or 3,900 people work in the healthcare industry. So just some important, helpful stats. In housing, in the area of housing, the majority of immigrant households were renters. So over 21,000, almost 22,000 people, renters. So if you're comparing the immigrant rental population with the US citizen renter population, we've got 75% of immigrant families are renters, of immigrants are renters versus about 41% of US born. And then with regard to health insurance in the city of Minneapolis, there is an estimated 28,000 residents, not immigrant residents, just residents who do not have health insurance. And about 42% of that number, so around 12,000 people, are immigrant residents without health insurance. And so these stats that I've pulled out, maybe it's obvious why I'm talking about them in the context of COVID-19, civil unrest, difficulty in access to healthcare, which I'll talk about more in a little bit, but just to kind of get a handle on what population is impacted and how this population is impacted in light of the challenges we're dealing with as a society and as a city right now. And one final stat that I want to bring up before I stop with the stats is mixed status households. Mixed status households are households where you have people who are documented and people who are undocumented. And in the city of Minneapolis, we have approximately 11,900 people who live with someone who is an undocumented family member. And the reason why I'm stressing this statistic, I think this is very important to take into consideration, is to remember that CARES funding that US citizens receive and people with a social security number have received. Well, people who live in mixed status households who are married to an undocumented person did not have access to that money and still do not have access to that funding. So when we're thinking about challenges that immigrant families, including mixed status families, are experiencing, that's an important consideration, that those individuals are in even more challenging financial circumstances because they were not eligible for financial assistance through the CARES Act. So I'm going to stop there because there was a lot of numbers. And if there are questions about the stats that I bored you with, please feel free to ask me questions. Or if what I shared prompts some questions, please ask now. I want to give you all time and introduce you to my daughter, who's like right back here. Oh, she doesn't want to be here. So, and that's her arm. Anyway. Are there any questions about that piece? Oh, how can we as a community support your work? I am going to get to that. There's a lot. There's a lot. We got a list of things that I can suggest. I just want to briefly talk about what I see as the challenges now based on the work that that the city of Minneapolis is doing. Both my office, our team within neighborhood and community relations, Department of Neighborhood and Community Relations, and the city as a whole. So some of the most critical challenges that we are seeing include food insecurity. The city of Minneapolis hosts or actually supports a food distribution event at Powderhorn Park, and there are between 300 and 500 families a week that go to obtain fresh produce, meat, other essentials at that location. It's just kind of an indicator of the critical need. A lot of the families there are Latinx families. The city is also in communication with an organization called Twin Cities Mutual Aid Project. And I'm going to stick it in the chat now, even though it is also in the PDF that Becky will be putting up, just so that you can take a look. And with regard to that question, how does Linden Hills fit into the rubric? Partnerships between neighborhood organizations and some of these pop-up food and essentials distribution events is an interesting and very valuable way that people can support community members, including immigrant and refugee community members. With regard to the second part of that question, do we have enough rentals? You know, honestly, this was kind of a new thing for me. I did look at the NCR, the City of Minneapolis neighborhoods pages, where you can look at different neighborhoods and get a feel for the ethnic makeup of the different neighborhoods and additional census-related data. I'm not sure if it drills down to number of renters by neighborhood, but I think that it's worthwhile. Oh my gosh, Erica, you're nodding yes. So like maybe you have more info to share. It'd be great if you could share. I think it's very helpful to have that resource to get a better handle on what your neighborhood looks like and who is renting. I don't know if you wanted to add anything briefly there or not, Erica.
So there's a survey that happens every, I don't know how many years, but if you look up like Minnesota Compass, but you can also go to the NCR page and then go down to what's called neighborhood programs. And so for each neighborhood, you can click on it and it will bring up your survey. And it has demographic breakdowns from rentals, income, race, age. So it's a really useful and helpful tool to see what the demos are. And I'm sure Becky has seen it and knows how to access it. Michelle, there was one other question. Do immigrants and refugees have support from nonprofits?
Yes, there is some support. I can give one example. An organization called CLUES, C-L-U-E-S, sought funding in order to provide financial support to families that did not qualify for CARES assistance. That's one example. Another example is there are several organizations that banded together to establish the Minnesota Immigrant Families COVID-19 Fund. They did a first round of distribution of funds to community members who did not qualify for CARES funding and were in significant need of assistance. And from what I understand, 400 people were served within the first round. That was $800,000. And they are trying to do a second round of funding. I know Clues also distributed an amount that was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, in addition to support, financial support from nonprofits. Perhaps you may or may not recall that the city of Minneapolis also had established a GAP fund for housing to provide rental and utility support. And the application period was in April. The application period was open for about 5 days. The first round of checks went out on June 1st, and the checks are sent out on an ongoing weekly basis until funds are expended. So it's helpful to have that information, but also, you know, I kind of would also like to turn to the issue of housing and talk about that in a little bit more detail. Perhaps some of you are aware of the fact that there is an eviction moratorium that is in effect, that is at the state level through the governor's office by executive order. This moratorium, I believe it's likely to be extended for an additional month to September. And my understanding is, I think it has been in effect since March, since the beginning of the peacetime emergency. So we've got a week or so in March, April, May, June, July. We're now in August, and maybe we'll go through September. So these are the months of rent that many people have not been able to pay. Because of the fact that we had a shelter-in-place order, many businesses closed. A lot of those businesses were restaurants. There are many immigrants, as I indicated with the stats, that work in the food service industry. So many have not been able to pay their rent for this 5 coming on 6 month period. Now, while the eviction moratorium prevents people from being expelled from their residences, it does not relieve the requirements to pay rent. So that rent remains due. So as soon as the eviction moratorium ends, we are going to be in another crisis situation if there is no way to provide support to people who have not been able to pay their rent and do not have a method of paying 6 months rent in one shot. So I do not have the solution there. I just think it's important to highlight the problem and again, reiterate the fact that the organizations that are creating this type of funding to help families that have no other source of financial support to meet their needs, that it is a worthwhile endeavor to investigate these funding sources, learn more about them, what they do. And if people are looking for a place to donate, that considering that as an area where you would be satisfying a critical need. I also briefly want to mention health and education. with the distance learning experience that many of us with children had in the second semester, right before the summer. It was very challenging for everyone, especially challenging for people whose first language is not English, and people who don't have access to devices like computer, internet access. While Minneapolis Public Schools was working to a one-to-one, so one device per student, that took some time. And that also doesn't take into consideration the many other academic institutions that are not part of the Minneapolis public school system and the challenges there. Also healthcare, and I'm gonna pause for a minute, but I just want to mention that for people who do not have insurance and are dependent upon free healthcare, there is a fear of utilizing healthcare and benefits for the immigrant population because of concerns that this will impact our immigration status. And because that subject that is a thread to the next thing I want to talk about, I just kind of want to stop for a second so we can all absorb this and address if there are questions at this point.
We do have a question. Has the rate of immigrants moving into Minneapolis increased or decreased or stayed steady over the last few years? And then does this mirror the overall national rate? I'm curious if the US Minneapolis is becoming a less desirable place in immigrant eyes due to political atmosphere as well as COVID-19.
Yes, that's an excellent question. With regard to specific stats, I will have to circle back with you, Ginny, on that. I actually have a couple of students at Humphrey who are doing some research for me, and so would love to be able to circle back with you after checking in with them. I can say on a national level that the number of people who are trying to come to the United States or succeeding in entering the United States is going down significantly. And this is not just in the family arena, but also employment-based and academic. So individuals who are coming to study in the United States. And part of the reason why is because it's becoming more challenging to obtain the right to enter the United States in the first place. And then also there's a concern about falling out of status. And I'll give one very revelatory example that you may have seen in the news relating to F1 students, F and J students. So people who are coming to the United States to pursue an academic degree, and the issue was the government was planning to deny status, deny entry, or revoke status for people who are in the United States pursuant to F1 status if they were going to an institution that was continuing to be fully online in the fall. The federal government walked that back. Harvard University and another university, I believe it was MIT, filed suit. And shortly after they sued, the government walked that back and changed its mind and decided not to implement that policy change of revoking status for F1 students or preventing people from coming into the United States in F1 or M status, that was the other one, if the school that they were planning to attend was going fully online. That kind of uncertainty, if people have the ability to go somewhere else to another country, that is really an incentive to not come to the United States. So yes, and I will circle back with you, Ginny, on the other portion of your question.
Michelle, we have another question. Heidi would be interested in the legal resources for eviction. Specifically, I have done housing mediations in this area, would like to explore mediation. She works with the Center for Conflict Resolution for those with the potential of eviction prior to expiration of the time period.
Wonderful. Thank you for that question. Actually, our Community Planning and Economic Development Department recently, CPAD, recently announced a relationship with Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid, Legal Service Organization with offices in Minneapolis, focusing on housing and eviction related issues. MMLA is an amazing nonprofit institution. You can connect with them directly. Again, on the one pager, I'm just going to show you because I keep looking at it, and Becky is going to put this up for everybody. But MMLA is listed on here with their website as well. If you're interested in volunteering, if you're interested in learning more, MMLA is a great resource and a great partner with the city of Minneapolis. I also want to mention that the Attorney General's office is very tuned to the issue of the state of Minnesota is very tuned to the issue of wrongful evictions that may be happening now. So if this is something that you become aware of in your community or in your work with others, including immigrant and refugee community members, just know that Keith Ellison's office is extremely active in this area. So if you just go to the website and even type in housing or evictions, you should be able to pull up some information on what they're doing in that area. They've been doing some very robust investigations in situations where people are being wrongfully evicted.
We have another question. Are the nonprofits CLUES and Minnesota Immigrant Families COVID-19 Fund?
Yes, CLUES is one of the nonprofits. The COVID-19 Fund is actually a partnership between several nonprofit organizations. These are also listed in the one pager. So it includes Black Immigrant Collective, Navigate or Unidos Minnesota, and Release Minnesota 8 are three of the main organizations that banded together to establish this fund. So you can go to the fund directly. You can also go to the individual organizations themselves to learn more about this, this fund that's been established that they're doing a second round of funding for. Okay. So should I move? Maybe I should move to the next. The bummer of, I mean, it's been like, it's a little bit of darkness, right? But opportunities too. So it's not all a bummer. But I do want to highlight, you know, there's so many immigration developments that we could talk about. I read somewhere that even since at the beginning of the pandemic, that there have been at least 50 presidential or executive actions in the area of immigration. So we could talk all night, right, about this and for the next week. I'm just going to lift up a couple of things that I think are worthwhile to think about with regard to our community here. One of them is a filing fee increase. So the federal government is imposing an immigration filing fee increase that impacts a variety of different immigration applications, from U.S. citizenship to a work authorization card, I-765 application for work authorization. And it's worth taking a look at some of these changes. I can forward, Becky, maybe I can forward it to you and you can share it with the rest of the group afterwards, because there's actually in the Federal Register, there is a chart that lists all the changes. There's some reductions, but I want to kind of talk a little bit about what these changes are and who's impacted. So there's a chart of what the current fee is, what the new fee will be, the amount change, and the percentage change. So this rule making these changes was issued, I believe, oh my gosh, it was either Monday of this week, the weeks pass so quickly, or last week. But anyway, it will go into effect on September 2nd. If there is no federal litigation that halts implementation of these fee changes. The reason why this is so important is because it creates a financial barrier to people being able to obtain immigration status or to obtain more secure immigration status, particularly naturalization. I think it's interesting to note that there are some applications that are employment-based, so that impact more affluent people, that have actually gone down. Like the cost has gone down, and I'm gonna pull out one. The I-140 application, it's an immigrant petition for an alien worker. That's the description of the form. The current fee is $700. It's going down to $555 for a reduction of $145. So that is it's interesting. Is that from the USCIS website? Because I'm actually looking at the Federal Register, and it's interesting that there is a difference there. Yeah, I wonder which one is the typo.
Sorry
Anyway,
that.
no, that
Yeah.
said, you know, still it's a reduction. So it's interesting to note that. And then if you look at, for example, the N400 application filing fee, that's an application for US citizenship. That filing fee is going from, it says $640 to $1,160. So an increase of $520. In addition to that, for citizenship, the government is, and this isn't a proposal, like this is going to happen, is reducing the number of waivers that people can obtain, or the ability of people to obtain a filing fee waiver if they can't afford to pay the filing fees. So again, I'll just repeat, like it is creating a significant financial barrier that just if you take a look at and understand which applications impact people who are likely, who may be likely to be on a socioeconomic level less affluent, definitely the wealth test that people have been talking about. Another example that I'll give is the I-601A, Provisional Unlawful Presence Waiver. And I'll explain who gets this waiver. This waiver is used for people who are in the United States without authorization, are trying to obtain an immigrant visa, say through a spouse, but have to get a waiver for their unlawful presence, the fact that they've been in the United States without authorization. They file this 601A before they leave the United States because they have to get the immigrant visa. So just talking about like these fee waiver, these fee changes, the filing fee there is increased from $630 to $960. So an increase of $330. Another change that is incredible is the N336. That's a request for hearing on a decision in naturalization. That's if you have like a preliminary denial of your naturalization application and you want to dispute it, you disagree that your naturalization application was denied. If you want to go back and challenge that decision, the filing fee used to be $700. The filing fee now, or the filing fee in October, on October 2nd, will be $1,725. So an increase of $1,000 to kind of stand on your rights to, you guys made a decision that was wrong, and you know you should make a new decision. You're going to have to pay an extra $1,000 to get that process. So it's worthwhile to look at these filing fee increases, particularly in the context of the fact that, as I've said, immigration is becoming a more complicated area of law than it already was. There are people who need an immigration attorney, right? Some can pay for an immigration attorney, some cannot. But even if you are receiving the benefit of a pro bono attorney through one of the legal service organizations, you still have this impediment of the filing fee and an inability to pay the filing fee. And the result of that is that people will not access immigration benefits that they qualify for based on an inability to pay. So that's one huge thing, and obviously I feel very strongly about it because I'm talking about it nonstop. But I also want to highlight another issue that is important, and I alluded to it before. It's public charge. This has been in the news over the course of the last couple of years, and just a quick summary of the issue. In February of this year, the federal government implemented a new rule relating to the public charge ground of inadmissibility. The public charge test is an analysis of whether some people can be denied a green card based on their use of public benefits in the past. So what this new rule did was expanded the category of benefits that the government could look at, as well as the criteria that they can examine in determining whether a person is likely to become a public charge. And they put out this huge, very long form, the I-944 form, which has a ton of questions on whether you're likely to become a public charge, analyzing a variety of different factors. So this rule, people have heard about this rule, and even if it doesn't apply to them, there are plenty of people who the public charge test doesn't apply to at all. Permanent residents who are applying for US citizenship, one example. People who are crime victims, who have U visas, refugees. You know, there are a variety of categories of people who don't even have to think about this at all. But because this subject has been in the news so much, people are frightened. And that fear leads to a reluctance to utilize any benefits that a person may qualify for because of this fear that it will have an impact on their ability to obtain or retain immigration status, or their ability to transfer immigration status to someone else. So our legal service partners, particularly Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid, is one that has been doing an incredible amount of outreach on this subject. They have a hotline number where you can call, and you can be assisted in multiple languages, so that if you're concerned about public charge issues, you can have your questions answered. Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid and another legal service organization called SMERLS, Southern Minnesota Regional Legal Services, have also worked with the State Department of Human Services to put out a flyer with their contact information and like a quick infographic, so that people, and it's put out in multiple languages too, so that people have a number to call and some basic information. And with regard to these and other immigration developments, I just want to make a plug for my office. The Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs does put out an immigration bulletin at least monthly that kind of goes through some of the like a high level of what changes are happening, where you can go to get more information, where you can go to get legal assistance. Also, the OIRA webpage has information. I try and update it regularly on these changes and how immigrant and refugee community members are impacted, and where you can go to get more information. So we're at 7 o'clock, so I'm gonna pause again to see if there are any questions or things that people wanna talk about. No, I can keep going. Should I keep going?
I was just going to ask if you could talk a little bit about DACA, and
yes,
and how many DACA or people who would qualify for DACA are here in Minnesota. And I know there's been some changes around that now, even after the Supreme Court decision?
Yes, thank you so much for bringing up DACA. So in the city of Minneapolis, I did quickly talk about the statistics. So it's 2.5% of the immigrant population would be DACA eligible. So I'll just quickly go through the Supreme Court decision. What the Supreme Court did was say that the way that the federal government terminated the DACA program was unlawful. Not that the government didn't have the authorization to terminate DACA, just that the way that they did it violated the Administrative Procedures Act. So very quickly afterwards, US Citizenship and Immigration Services came back and said, you know what? We are thinking about the Supreme Court decision and how to move forward. And while we are thinking about that, we are going to do the following. And they had been receiving, as soon as the Supreme Court decision came out, people started filing initial DACA applications, because since September 2017, you were not able to file a new DACA application. You could file renewals, but new applications were halted. So as soon as the Supreme Court decision came out, people started filing new applications, new DACA applications, even if they hadn't held DACA before. So USCIS wanted to put a stop to that. So they issued, and this information is available on the USCIS webpage too. They issued a statement, a memorandum, basically indicating that they would be rejecting all pending and future first-time requests for DACA, and refund filing fees for the new applications. So if you had filed a new application for DACA, your application would be rejected. In addition, they would reject all pending and future requests for advance parole. Advance parole is a document that you use to re-enter the United States from abroad. One wonderful advantage of deferred action for childhood arrivals is that people could get this advance parole document, leave the United States, and then come back, and that entry would be a valid entry. And that was very meaningful for some people who are trying to obtain a more permanent immigration status. So the government says no pending or future advance parole documents issued. In addition, the government, USCIS, said that they were cutting DACA renewals from 2 years to 1 year. So DACA renewals were typically granted in increments of 2 years. Cutting renewals down to 1 year doubles the filing fee. And while in the memorandum, USCIS said we should consider whether renewal filing fees should be decreased. In reality, particularly given the increase in filing fees that I was talking to you about a little bit earlier, I think it is highly unlikely that USCIS is going to come back and say, you know what, for these renewals, we'll charge less. No, I think it's more likely that what will happen is that people will basically have to pay twice for the 2 years that they were getting as a matter of course beforehand. One other troubling comment that was in the memorandum was that USCIS officers were instructed that they could make decisions to end or deny the deferred action that you get through DACA in the exercise of discretion. Whenever you hear this language in the exercise of discretion, it basically gives the government a lot of leeway to do what they want, giving, maybe minimal justifications. So I think that language is very troubling. And Becky, thank you so much for bringing that up. I think that's very important for people to be aware of. And then in terms of the population in the city of Minneapolis, I think it's about 1,400 individuals who are DACA eligible. In this whole state of Minnesota, I'm not 100% sure. I believe it's 4,000, but I'm not positive. 4,000 DACA beneficiaries. I'd have to check on that, but I think it's around that number. So it looks like there's another question here from Betty. Once a family gets aid, where do they go next since they're still not working? And can undocumented immigrants qualify for help from the Hennepin Emergency Rental Assistance Fund? Thank you so much for bringing up that question and comment. So in terms of assistance, there are a variety of areas, right? And it's kind of a patchwork of help. So people need food assistance, people need rental assistance, people may need health assistance. So there are a number of different organizations and entities that can provide that type of support. So for food assistance, TCMAP is a place where people can find different mutual aid sites. There are also food shelves that are run by different organizations, including organizations that are primarily serving immigrants. With regard to housing assistance, yes, the Hennepin County Emergency Rental Assistance Fund is still in existence. There is not a requirement to demonstrate valid immigration status in order to qualify. And that is a supplementary form of assistance that people should be applying for, even if they did apply for City of Minneapolis GAP funding. That assistance is very important and useful. So I appreciate that you brought that up. Other questions? Because I'm going to move into the what can you do to help portion of our conversation now. Unless there are questions, I'll wait just for a second. And Becky, this might be a good time to put up the PDF again, because I'm going to be going through some of these things. Great, super. Okay, so in terms of assistance, like what do people need? How can you help? One of the biggest areas of need is legal and including immigration legal services. Helping people to get from one status to another, helping people who are in immigration court removal proceedings. These nonprofit organizations that I've listed do this very important work. And some of them do this work unfunded. Like they do this work because they know that the community needs help. One quick example that I can give, there's a law, it's called LRIFA, Liberian Refugee Immigrant Fairness Act, that enables Liberians who are in the United States as of November 2014 and their family members to obtain permanent resident status in the United States. There was so much excitement when this law was passed in December of last year, but there is a short window for people to be able to qualify. Their applications must be filed by December 20th. Of this year. Unless there is an extension, people will no longer qualify for this important benefit to obtain permanent residence or a green card. These nonprofit organizations are doing outreach and are actually assisting people, attorneys are assisting people in filing this application and helping people obtain permanent resident status. And even if they're unfunded, because of the fact that it's such a critical need and there's such a small window, they're trying to assist people in filing these applications. Another area of outreach is relating to helping people file applications for different types of immigration status quickly in light of the fact that the filing fees are likely to change. So if there's an area in which you feel like you want to help immigrant and refugee community members, I would strongly recommend connecting with one of these organizations, whether it be Our formal partners are Advocates for Human Rights, Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota, Volunteer Lawyers Network, or other partners that we, if we don't have a formal relationship with, we work with often to ensure that community members have access to accurate information, including Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid, the International Institute of Minnesota, and the University of Minnesota Law School Binger Center for New Americans. I would also indicate that some focus on naturalization. So if you want to help people file their application for citizenship, you can go to their websites and see the work that they do. The Advocates focus is a great deal on asylum. So that is one critical area of support. With regard to food and essential household support, as I've said multiple times, this is also an area where because many immigrant and refugee community members are working in and have been working in areas that are disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, by the civil unrest that followed the killing of George Floyd, these basic needs that they have, it's the fact that there are organizations, mutual assistance organizations that are at the ready, pop-up sites that are available for people to go and have their needs met. It's such a critical resource. The list on Twin Cities Mutual Aid Project identifies the different locations, what their needs are, if they need volunteers, if they need donations, what their hours of operation are, if they need language support. So it's worthwhile checking out that webpage just to kind of see what's out there. The city of Minneapolis also has food shelf information, food distribution information. I'm happy to share that information too, in case you're interested. I will also mention that with regard to neighborhood organizations, what we're seeing with some of these pop-up sites is that as they're transitioning, if they are interested in continuing to provide support through September, through October, indefinitely, that having a partnership with a neighborhood organization is something that could be mutually beneficial in terms of continuity of that type of support. Frankly, I don't think things are going to get better. I think that they're going to get worse and that there will be more of a need. So if that is an area that you and your neighborhood organization or other neighborhood organizations may be interested in exploring further, connect with your neighborhood specialist. Feel free to reach out to me and I can facilitate a connection to people who are working more in that area. So I'll skip to financial support. We talked about this as well. There are a variety of different funds. The one that I listed is one, I connected with a person who's working on that fund, and she explained to me their second round of funding. The organizations that are involved in that fund are listed. Some of them are listed under educational civic engagement support for immigrants in crisis. So if you're interested and want to investigate further, you can go to any one of those organizations. So I'm going to jump down to that list of educational civic engagement support for immigrants in crisis. So Learning in Style, I'll just pull that up. That is a school that is run by I think Sisters of St. Mary or St. Benedict. It's such a lovely institution. So they provide education, English, and other subjects. They also have a computer loan program. They moved to virtual instruction as a result of the pandemic. And so they are loaning out computers and are accepting donations, so that their students can have access to virtual education. They're also doing a food shelf in partnership with an academic institution, a high school in the area. So that's an interesting organization to look into. Black Immigrant Collective, I want to highlight what I heard about their work. So some of what they do is assist people who are transitioning out of immigration detention. So if you're detained by immigration and customs enforcement, and you're able to pay a bond to get out of immigration custody, this organization helps people with their immediate needs. So say you just got out of immigration custody, but you have no groceries, or you have no clothes, or you have no like hygiene products. They actually go out to the store and buy the stuff and bring it to the individual who needs it. So that is like a volunteer opportunity. Like if you're interested in providing that more hands-on support, feel free to connect with Black Immigrant Collective, and I'm sure that they can identify opportunities to provide assistance to people. Navigate Unidos Minnesota is an organization that has been in existence for a long time. I believe it was founded by Councilmember Palmisano. I don't remember how, I think it was maybe 15 years ago. The initial focus was helping people to achieve a goal of moving towards higher education. Their goals are broader now, include civic engagement and awareness, orienting people around the census, and providing critical hands-on support to immigrant community members, including undocumented community members. COPAL, another organization that does a lot of work around civic engagement. Release Minnesota 8 is an organization that focuses on helping people who are in immigration court proceedings understand how best to advocate for themselves. Coalition of Asian American Leaders, another great organization. And I'm gonna jump to, let's see, Interfaith Coalition on Immigration does a lot of advocacy work around immigrants in detention. And Conversations with Friends is an organization that provides support, assistance, and companionship to people who are in immigration custody, and also provides assistance to people who are recently released from immigration custody. I think that there's a page 2 also, but I can't remember if there was more than just that. Becky, did I send you a page 2 too? I can't recall.
I condensed it into one page.
Oh, good. Thank you for doing that. There was a logo
at the bottom, and I just took the logo off so it would all fit on one page.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. I was trying to do that, and gosh, sometimes my computer skills are just abysmal. So thank you, Becky. I appreciate it. So let's see. Oh, thank you, Erica. So that's my webpage for the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. And Becky, I think that there was also a PowerPoint slide that has my contact information as well. Feel free to reach out to me. The webpage is there. If you want to sign up for the monthly immigration bulletin, it's a good way to get access to accurate information. On the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs webpage, if you look at immigration legal service providers, all of our partners and other legal service organizations that provide immigration-related legal assistance are listed there. So feel free to check out the website, investigate a little bit. I'm always very enthusiastic to receive feedback on whether information is helpful, what people would want to see that maybe isn't there. So yes, feel free to reach out. I think that those were the main things I wanted to share, but curious about whether there are questions or comments or things that you're doing that you want to tell me about that I can share with other people, because I love doing that too. So I think we have a little bit of time left. Oh, Judy, you're muted. We're all getting good at reading lips, right?
I know, I know. Okay, I was going to say, Ginny Halloran, when she introduced herself, was talking about mediation. And I think there was a question about possibilities for mediation. Erica, was there something on there about opportunities to who to work with if you were already involved in mediation types of, you have mediation type skills, that's what I mean. Am I still on mute? No.
No, we hear you. You asking Erica? Were you asking Erica because the question was a little higher in the chat?
Yes, I am.
So
Let me check it out.
and I did mention Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid as a resource, but also a place where people can connect if they want to volunteer. You know, I know informally people are suggesting that renters communicate with their landlords to see if there can be some sort of an arrangement. But often that is a very uneven sort of relationship there in terms of power, who has the power and who doesn't.
Yeah.
So having someone who has skills in mediation is very useful. And I do know that MMLA does plug volunteers, and I would defer to an organization like that has expertise in housing and can better direct people who want to volunteer.
So I'll just add, Heidi said that she works for the Center for Conflict Resolution, and she was the one who had done housing mediation.
I'm sorry, it was Heidi, yeah.
So the Center for Conflict Resolution, another place that I know has worked a lot, just in terms of what Michelle's been talking about, is Homeline. They do free tenant, like legal tenant advising. And so they're another great resource here in the cities.
Becky, do you want me to put the question in chat, or can I ask it now? I mean, just a question. Okay. Michelle, one of the things that you mentioned is the difficulty that everybody has had with the distance learning, and that is a particular challenge for people whose language English is not their first language, is not English, or if they have internet connections or not, or if they have devices or not. Which of these are any of these organizations that you have listed? I'm kind of overwhelmed with an embarrassment of riches here from you.
I get it.
So
I'm sorry.
Thank you. No, it's great. It's great. But are any of those organizations working with specifically with the schools and with students that you know about?
That is an excellent question. And I am actually just going to put a little bit of information into the chat. These organizations, I'm not aware of whether they are doing a lot around distance learning, but I am going to mention the following. The State Council on Latino Affairs, the State Council on Asian Pacific Minnesotans are two entities that are very focused on this subject.
Okay.
So I'm gonna write them in the chat. So on Latino Affairs. Okay, those are two. Another is Latino Lead. And this organization, Latino Lead, has been convening bi-weekly meetings within the Latinx community. And one of the subjects of conversation has been this distance learning piece, how to ensure that the State Department of Education is doing what it needs to do to improve distance learning for all families, including people who are members of communities of color. Let's see. Okay. So those are my first thoughts.
Okay.
I can circle back with you, Judy, once I kind of look through some of my old notes from meetings with the Latinx group to see if there are other entities that are working in this area. Let me think. I know that there's a state representative named Carlos Mariani who had an organization called Minnesota Education Partnership. Minnesota Education Partnership. Let me see if I can pull it up. And then I did put something in the chat, PCs for People. And I think that they are working on trying to assist. Here we go.
Michelle, your chats aren't showing up.
No.
Are you doing? No.
Maybe you were sending them to one person instead of everyone.
Oh, wait, was I sent them to Betty. I'm sorry. Okay, I think I'm gonna try and
it does that automatically. If somebody sends you a personal message, it automatically prompts you to just reply to them. So I've done that before.
Yeah. Michelle, also, like, getting back to Judy's question about mediation, were you in that meeting? And I can't remember which one it was, but it was specifically someone, I believe, from the state of Minnesota who was doing mediation with the eviction moratorium. Like, they were contacted by a tenant, and then they would go to the landlord and be like, listen, this is what the situation is. Do you remember who that was?
I know that there was a meeting within the Latinx community that included the Attorney General's office. And I think in one of the community briefings, is that ringing a bell that it was one of the community briefings? It was. It might have been the East African. So the city of Minneapolis held a series of community briefings with different community members, Southeast Asian community, East African, Latinx, African American, Native American, LGBTQ, AI plus, and at one of those meetings, there were representatives from the Attorney General's office, and I believe that those contacts were in the context of a dispute between the renter and the landlord. Again, I can go back and look at my notes and see. But I'm just going to see if I can pull up information from the Attorney General's office right now. If there are other questions while I'm pulling it up, let me know.
I just wanted to ask the question.
I did put the Minnesota Education Equity Partnership in there too.
So my question was around the food assistance, and you had talked about pop-up sites and how neighborhood organizations could play a role. And since I'm very interested in learning more about that, what kind of role neighborhood organizations can play.
So I'll give you one example. I'll give you a couple of examples. One is in obtaining licensure as a food shelf. There's a procedure that entities have to go through if they want to obtain a license to be a food shelf. It doesn't cost much money, but you do have to have a formal organizational structure, which some of these pop-ups do not have. It's just people who are getting together and are providing, satisfying the need in the community. So if there is if the neighborhood organization, which does have that formal organizational structure, is interested in supporting a pop-up in this way, what they can do is connect so that they are filing the application for the license and are working together with the entity that is actually providing the food and the volunteers. So that is one possibility. Another that's worth worthwhile to think about as well is, you know, through federal CARES dollars that filter down through the state, there is this recognition that people have immediate needs, right, that are related to food access. And so there's funding coming through at the federal, the state, and the county level. But in order to qualify for that funding, again, often you need to have a certain organizational structure. So I'm a little more unfamiliar about whether this is more Erica's area, really, that maybe, or maybe not, than mine, but like with regard to applying for CARES funds, I don't know if neighborhood organizations can do that, but it's an area that you may want to explore because of the fact that there is this need, there are these dollars, and if the only impediment to accessing this financial funding is the organizational structure, and this is an area that neighborhood organizations want to be involved in to support community, then it's worthwhile kind of looking to that a little bit further. If that is of interest, I'm happy to connect you with, there's a person who's in the health department who's really been doing amazing work working with these pop-ups. Her name is Tamara Down-Schwei. And if you're interested, hello, my love. I'd be happy to connect you with her. Do you remember me? We played with pom-poms together like a year ago. Anyway.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful. So I will be following up with you on that. Thank you.
Okay, sounds good.
And then I thought I'd do kind of a last call here. We're at 8:30 and see if there's any, does anyone have any final questions for Michelle before we wrap up? Okay, well, I just want to say thank you so much to Erica and Michelle for being here tonight and for sharing all of this really important information. I think this has been really helpful, and I hope I will distribute that list to everyone, not just people who made it to the call tonight, but also to people who registered and were unable to make it. And I will plan to share it widely when we also share this recording. So this will be recorded on our YouTube channel, so it'll be available for all of you to share with people that you would like to share this message with. And in addition, I just wanted to announce that we're very excited. Next month, we're going to try to do one of these speakers every month. And next month's speaker will be from the Immigration Law Center in Minnesota. The executive director there, Vina Iyer, will be joining us. So thank you, Michelle, for connecting us. And Michelle will be facilitating that talk.
Great. That's
so
great.
Thank you all tonight for coming.
Thank you. Thank you
all.
Thanks very much.
Michelle.
I did learn how to make a screenshot, so thank you.
Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Okay.
Bye.